Armando Zumaya has been a significant force in major fundraising efforts since the 1980s. From door knocking to billion-dollar-plus campaigns, and more recently, leading development efforts for top arts and social service institutions, Armando has become synonymous with fearless, data-driven fundraising. He is also a leading advocate for Latinx philanthropy and fundraising, putting this topic front and center through his newly formed organization, Somos El Poder. We spoke with him about the origins of this work, its importance, and the change he envisions is possible through this advocacy. So you're from LA. Which part of LA? Where were you born?
I'm from what is colloquially referred to as La Los, which is East LA, which is Boyle Heights. So I'm a proud Roosevelt High School graduate, the largest high school in the United States of America.
Is that still true?
Yes, it is. 5,800 students.
Wow. Was it that big when you were there?
Bigger. It was, you were more likely to get shot or stabbed than go to a two-year college. It was the highest Marine Corps recruitment ISP rate in the United States.
So how did you avoid going into the Marine Corps from Roosevelt High School?
Which is actually something. My dad was in the Army. My brother was in the Army. We were expected to go in the Army. And I was like, no, I don't want to. This thing, weird aversion to killing people. So, you know, I'm a weirdo because I know a lot about military history, but, you know, I'm also a big peacemaker.
Yes. Now, I know it was a little time between high school and later that you started working in the peace movement. But before we go there, what was it like going to a high school with 5,800 kids? I mean, how many of them did you really know from the neighborhood where you grew up? That's a lot of people. Did you feel lost there or?
No, all Mexicans, overwhelmingly, I would say 95%. And I knew my class, still do. Mm-hmm. And that's about it. Yeah, you didn't know the other classes. And, you knew the people in your direct neighborhood. So think about a 3-block radius. And I lived across the street from the high school. And so actually there's a video on the website for Somos El Poder where I talk about what motivated me. Well, I talk about the high school and the Chicano riots in 1973. So you want to go there or not?
Well, let's hold on to that because I do want to go there. But you just said you were across the street from the high school. How did that happen? I mean, did your parents move there thinking, let's let our kid go to the high school across the street?
My dad bought the house before he was even married, before he knew we were going to come along. Saw this house. It's a very funny, it's gone, which is very, very, very sad. A Japanese doctor built it. It was Victorian, but you could see the Japanese influence in the roof, the structure. So it was like a Japanese Victorian. 3 stories, just beautiful, big old house. And my dad saw the guy moving out one day. He said, "You want to sell it?" The guy said, "Sure." Back in those days, it was thousands of dollars, like $3,000-4,000 bucks.
Wow.
It was the late 50s.
Yeah. And so your dad was there single at first. Where was he from originally?
From East LA too. Born and raised. In what's now called Aliso Village. Back then it was called the Russian Flat. And my dad was what would be called a tough boy. He was like a gang member until he realized it was not a good thing to do and became a better guy. He was the first guy to go to college in my whole neighborhood. And he was criticized. We were criticized.
Really?
Like, what kind of man, doesn't work? What is that, work? It's not work. You went to college. For what? Who do you think you are? And so, yeah, that's when my brother and I learned to fight. To defend my mom. My mom was the first woman to go to work outside the home to become a nurse. And so, this is amazing. So that's the sort of the story of where the family got the house from. And we lived in there for 25 years.
Wow. And your mom, is she from LA as well?
Yeah, born and raised.
Yeah.
And she was raised in the same neighborhood. And so my mom was born there in the same hospital. She what hospital she was born in, just got me going. She was probably born in County General. And my dad, she was probably born in her house. My dad was born in his house. My dad was born in 28. My dad just passed away like 6 months ago. He was 92. He was a hell of a guy and taught me a lot about what it means to be a man and to be kind and all sorts of things. And taught me racial pride too. So he's up there in heaven cutting a rug with a farmer, no doubt. That's not even a discussion, that's for sure. I know my dad loved to dance, and he was crazy about my mom, man. 58 years married.
Amazing. So you were there at Roosevelt, and then I know you went to the university in California, and then to UC.
Riverside, brother,
Riverside.
come on.
Yeah. And I know you did undergraduate and graduate work there. When did your whole work with the peace movement start? Was that when you were a student, or was that earlier?
Well, the peace movement started when I left. When I was in college, I got active in CISPIS, the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. So I became sort of more of a left winger there. I mean, the story I was going to tell you about in front of my house as an 8-year-old was where that came from. When you grow up and, in that place, you see things, it changes you, makes you see inequity, you live it.
Right.
So it's not a book, it's not a movie. I saw people dragged off the streets by the INS. I'll never forget, there's a girl, my brother and I were both 12 years old, had a crush on her. She was so cute. And we talked to her, and my brother was all like trying to flirt and everything. You know how shitty you are flirting when you're 12. And we turned around, and 2 big white guys dragged her away, threw her in her car, never saw her again. And that's okay. And the milk she was getting her mom was on the floor there. They're looking at her. That's a feeling a lot of people in America don't have. It's a trippy feeling. And so you learned that also, too, there's violence and gunfire and stuff there, too. So it makes you a different person. But we got off on a tangent. The peace movement happened after I left college. I was in retail for a year because I was in retail during college experience. I paid for college. For the department store, which I loved. And eventually I got sick of it, being very soulless, for me at least, excuse me. I saw an ad in the newspaper that said, a job you can believe in, St. Freeze. Back when they had ads in the newspaper. And I showed up to an interview with a bunch of peace activists in suit and tie. They thought I was a cop. So they're all like, oh, what the heck's going on here? About that joint stuff. Pretty funny. I was like, oh, I'm here to interview. And they practically said you're hired before I was done with the interview. And it was a door-to-door peace activist, 5 years. That changed everything about it. I learned to fundraise in a weird way, like a hustler, talk fast, read to people. It's like qualification training, but in the streets. So it was very good training for me as a fundraiser. And then I had this big experience, which was I had a daughter. I was 24 and 25. And I had a beautiful baby who's still the joy of my life. And I was making $1,000 a year. So I was like, I have to get a real job. And believe me, it was very hard for me to leave the peace movement. It was, even with that. And I applied 27 times. I moved the office. My ex-wife was from upstate New York. And we moved to Ithaca, New York. And there's, a couple of jobs in town. The big job is to work at Cornell. And so I got a job at Cornell. I was really lucky. It was done through sheer force of will to get that job. That's another story too. And I got that job there, and that was literally going from the third world to the USS Enterprise fundraising. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about how you made that transition, and you gave kind of a short version of your Sane Freeze days. I also don't know that a lot of people know what Sane Freeze is now. Can you describe that and why it was important to you?
Now it's called Peace Action, but we were working to stop underground nuclear weapons testing as a way to stop the development of nuclear weapons. I could still do my old rap too, man. says, "Hi, this is Armando. I'm working for the oldest and largest peace and justice movement in the United States of America. It's called St. Freeze. We're working to stop underground nuclear testing in the war in El Salvador." So, yeah, it's like burned into your brain. There's no way to get that out. And so, yeah, and you do that with a clipboard, donkey stance, whip it out, and no, that was very beautiful work we did. We did organizing work in Santa Barbara County. I ran the Santa Barbara office. And we threw out a 14-term Republican out of office through our organizing in very conservative districts. And it was the first time in my life I saw, I can do this. I can lead people. And it felt good, to, move the needle, to do something, to be effective. Because, where I was from, everyone told you would fail. Except your parents, of course.
Well, now I know that you weren't always knocking on friendly doors either. You've talked to me about this.
Jeez Louise. Yeah, I mean, the few doors I had dogs rush me. I had people with guns, naked people, which is the worst. Yeah, it's like, please, thanks. People doing things you don't want to see. But the scariest ones were people who wanted to kill you, wanted to hurt you. And so we worked in tandem across the street from each other for security. Sometimes we had like little walkie-talkies and things. But there were a few times I had, I had 38s in my head, 45s, you name it. People who wanted to, you damn communists, you son of a bleep, 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 bleep. You're the, oh man, Trumpers aren't new now. There were, right-wingers back then who thought I was literally Fidel Castro was flying in and giving you a paycheck. They were just sure of it. And so you got out of those situations through just common sense and guts, just looking them in the eye. And so, yeah, it happened about 8 or 9 times. The worst one ever was in Hermosa Beach, California on PCH. I was knocking on doors, and what those big hedges with a door cut them?
Yeah.
They're like 8 feet tall. So I'd been to a house before that was all glass. This is very wealthy neighborhood. And I didn't know the light was all dark. I knocked on the door, and I wrote it down, come back. I didn't know there was an older lady inside who saw me and assumed I was a thief because of the way I looked. And she called the Hermosa Beach police and said, "There's a man with a gun trying to get my house."
Uh-oh.
Right. So I go the next door over, knock on the door, and I come through the hedge, and I look to the left, and there's 2 shotgun barrels right there. And these guys are trembling. And I'm like, whew. So I said, this is exactly what I said. I said, "Gentlemen, I am not armed. I am a peace activist." I said, "On the count of 3, I'm going to turn my back on you." And then I did that 1, 2, 3. I said, on the count of 3, I'm going to put my hands on my head so you can see my hands. Like, I said, on the count of 3, I'm going to go down on one knee and down on the other. And gentlemen, it would be nice if you put safeties on those guns. As you can see, I have a permit and I'm unarmed. Talk to them as calmly as possible, because one jitter and that you're dead. So that was her most. The cop goes, "This is really reassuring." So I was like, "You bastards! Would you stop pointing that freaking shotgun at me?" So later on, cops don't do this now. Later on, he went, "Oh, I'm sorry, man," because we got bad information. I said, "Yeah, why don't you go talk to her and tell her that she almost got an innocent person killed? Because if I had just went, yeah, what the hell?" I was shot.
Wow.
So, and that was one time. There were other times too. When cops are trying to, actually, there's cops with warrants trying to get you. South Pasadena. We'll never talk about that.
Wow. So again, you went from that, which is really rugged work. You're knocking on doors. You don't know who they are. So take the politics out of it. It's still pretty tough for anybody who's afraid to talk to strangers. And you had to do that. You cut your teeth in fundraising, but also just this kind of human interaction, doing that. And then you went to Cornell. What a difference. I mean, maybe not. What was it like to transition?
it was funny because I joined the Cornell Fund, which I'm still very proud of. I love the Cornell. I love Cornell, still do. I have great affection for the place for a bunch of reasons. But Sarah Pearson was my boss then. I think now she was VP at Bowdoin, Chicago. I think she's still in Chicago. But they had some really tough reunion classes, class of 70, that took over. They were literally took over with guns. The Black Student Union took over the student union. And the jocks, the frat boys tried to get it. I mean, they were literally at war with each other, class of 70.
Wow.
And the reunion campaign model was like the Richie Cunningham model of everyone knows the alma mater wears a sweater and they're all white. It's like the model did not work for that class.
Yeah.
And their prior fundraising numbers were abysmal. Right. So she was looking at this and she said, I need somebody who's out of the box, different, who's a hustler. And when I interviewed, she was like, that's the guy. I don't need the same old guy who went to Cornell. I need somebody who's like kind of a rogue. And that's what I was. At Cornell, I've gotten a lot of trouble, man. Because I was like, you know what? I'll just do it the way I want to do it. The heck with rules, protocols, databases. I'll make it up as I go along. It was not once I was called into the vice president's office and the boss there. Because I was the first guy to say, annual fund, we get prospect research too. No, only major gift. I'm like, heck with that. I'm going upstairs to talk to this prospect research. And I used to take them cookies and things. People thought I was having an affair with a couple of them because I was always up there. Please, prospect research, give me something. They loved me.
And prospect research was pretty different back then too.
Yeah, there was an old paper marked in London screening. And I was doing a reunion campaign class, and Major Gifts was like, oh, this is terrible. We don't need this. I was like, you guys going to throw this away? Well, you can have it. But, okay. So I just grabbed it and was like, okay, this is like gold. I immediately understood. I don't know how. Immediately understood what it was. And started to just mine the heck out of it. And I'm just making big gifts, bringing them down right and left. So Major Gifts noticed. And they said, I stole this screening from you. It wasn't my property. My boss went to the mat and was like, nope, he's doing his job. And they were like, oh, we hate that guy. So this is all ancient history. Some of these people are no longer with us. But yeah, there was this young punk who shook everything and did different things, some of which were very successful and still being used. But I brought in a different dynamic, and Sarah was right. I mean, we rocked that class. We made our goal. It was hard. But yeah, so I kind of took on the tough classes from there on in until I became a leadership gifts officer. And that was a different type of work. Yeah. So I love the university. To this day, I snobbishly compare it to other places.
Well, it was also the place where really everything we think of when we think about moves management or the major gift programs of great campaigns were really, much of that was developed right there at Cornell when you were there.
Yeah. It was the first $1 billion campaign. And I knew Dave Dunlop pretty well because my father-in-law at the time was close friends with him. Dave Dunlop and I had kind of a showdown one time. This is how punkish I was. It's embarrassing to talk about it now. But we had this showdown over paid student funding. So he believed in amateur or volunteer student funding, right, with all these frats and stuff. And I said, no, you got to pay these people. Come on, they're students. They need money. And you'll get a better quality of call and relationship with the paid student funder. It was like, and we had back and forth argument. And like I said, I'm like a kid, and I'm telling Dave Dunlop he's wrong. Right? And at that time, he was principal of this, okay? I don't know who thought of it. Maybe he did. I wouldn't have been that old. But they said, okay, let's get 12 of your phoners in the room, 12 of my phoners in the same room, and let's see who raises more money in one night. And I won. So it was, and he was a gentleman about it. He goes, oh, I've seen the light. Yeah, that was one of those things like, oh, what am I getting myself into? So yeah, talk about ancient. I haven't thought about that in ages. But yeah, that was me at Cornell.
Now and that was a launch for you into a whole bunch of different kinds of major principal gift kind of fundraising throughout a career. And you've gone from East Coast to West Coast different kinds of organizations. What's the connective tissue in all that? What keeps you moving through that?
I do love prospecting. I do love the thrill of saving the day, of pulling out the impossible gift. Working for a big institution where big gifts come in all the time, to me, that's just kind of like, yeah, cool. The institutions I've worked for, by and large, are ones I deeply believe in. Some of them more recently were pretty flawed places, which I didn't know when I started. But no, for me, it's I love fundraising. I love people having the opportunity to do good with money. I love the empowerment of people, especially when you're talking about mass funding and new people doing major giving. It's a lot of fun. And you're doing good for the planet. It's how can you do wrong? Only in the last, few years have I really become. I started out social justice and coming back to my roots because I had that weird, I don't know anyone else who's had this, which is, I started out we call it keep the lights on fundraising, knocking on doors, peace movement, social justice. And then I went to work for Cornell. And then when I left, the university space, it was like, how do you get that model and make it small and make it work for, how do you make little institutions raise more money, a lot more? What lessons can these big institutions teach, small institutions, and vice versa? I was a small institution fundraising at Cornell. I was a canvasser at Cornell. That's what I earlier was. I wasn't, these great, moves managing people that waited for 3 years to move on somebody. I couldn't. I was too late. I haven't picked up the phone, and I was in the right spot. Thanks to Sarah and Kathy Cole, my former boss, who's one of the best bosses I ever had, after you, Jake. It's the corollary is I love doing good. I love the power of fundraising and prospect research. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful. When you see it work, when you see it do beautiful things, when you see people's lives change. I had experiences there where I made scholarships happen, and these kids came up to me and they thanked the donor, and then they looked me in the eye. Did you do this? And I'm like, well, the donor did, but you did it. And I'm like, well, yeah. He goes, I'm the first person in my whole family. God bless you, And you're like, whoa, okay. Who gets to do that in their job? That's, I had an experience when I was in public school reform. I worked for 5 years for private learning partners. And it was very transformative for me. Here in the Central Valley in this super poor school district. Literally, the state was about to take it over. And it was the poorest place you ever saw. Literally, kids running around without shoes. Distended bellies. We're talking poverty. The number one cyclical poverty numbers in the country, past West Virginia, Mississippi, to California, Central Valley. So we're out there, and we're talking to the school district, and my job was to fill the delta. So we would go to the school district, and they would say, okay, well, we have a delta of $400,000. We got our money, your money. This is what we need to do this project in for the school. So my boss would look at me, and I'd done my research. But yeah, we can do that. So we were in this school district and Sanger Unified, and she said $50,000. I'm like, no way am I raising $50,000 here. No way. Okay, literally, I couldn't raise $5,000 here. This is ridiculous. So we turned the contract down, and I walked out, feeling a little bad, to the playground, and this little girl, like 3 feet tall, got my finger, and she looked at me and she said in Spanish, "Usted aquí para ayudarnos. Are you here to help us?" And I was just like, oh man, it was just like she hit me with a pipe. And I got down on one knee and I looked at her and I said, "Sí, por supuesto, chica. Don't worry. Yes, of course, sweet." And I went back and told my boss, "Accept the contract." She was like, "You just told me." And I said, "Accept the contract." She goes, "Okay, you better come up with that. And you have 3 months." So I was like, oh, what have I done? So I went out and I did all my prospect research, all my trade craft, all the stuff I knew how to do. Mm-hmm. and tried to make it happen. And, first I went to the banks and I guilt tripped each one. We got 5,000. And then I went to the biggest landholder in town and I got like another 5,000. And Carol Harris, yeah, she was awesome. And then I went to the Chinese market owner there, Gong's Market, I remember the name. And the little 14-year-old girl translated to the dad who owned the big markets, like a market. There's no supermarket. And he said, yeah, I'll put money in. And then finally, my old prospect research friend looked up his name for me. And it was this guy who'd gone to Sangre Unified. He'd been my Berkeley campaign chair in the East Coast. A great guy named Tom Schneider. And she says, you know where he went to school? Sangre Unified. In the 30s. German family, farmers, So I went to the archives of Sangre Unified and I found a class picture. And the little rascal, the little Roy Fauntleroy with the thing with the shirt, there he was on the steps. So I got to the point with him. He goes, what do you want? What's this about? You don't want money, right? So I put the picture down. I said, your school needs your help. He was like crying. He's like, bastard. He's like, whoa, that's what you call cultivation. Like, damn, here's your school. They need your help. He goes, what do you need? So he wrote me a $25,000 check. All this was 3-year pledges. So everyone gave the same amount for 3 years. And because of that campaign, they turned that school district around. It became a state, #1 school district. It still is. And people would move from Fresno and other towns to get into that school district. So it's a state distinguished school district. Because that program worked so well, those people were so hungry for help and change. And it's beautiful, because that little girl, she one could say she saved her town, to some degree. And it was just those moments of a mix of just, recklessness. One of my first bosses, who are long since gone, who was a civil rights icon, Reverend William Sloan Coffin. I call him Bill Coffin. He has this great quote. He says, I love the recklessness of faith. First you jump and then you grow wings. And that's real good fundraising. That's what it's like. So yeah, who gets to do that? Come on. That's rock and roll.
Now, you said before, you gave us examples of a little girl and then I guess a young man getting the scholarship. This is the impact on individuals. But you just talked about a donor and slapping down the photograph. And one perspective on that is that made it possible for that gift to happen. What did it mean to the donor? Because you have interacted with a lot of donors where maybe nobody did that before. It must have been meaningful to him and to many of these other people for somebody to come in there and jog their memory and tell them something is important.
Yeah, it meant a tremendous amount to him. He lost touch with that world. He was a New Yorker, lived in Greenwich. And, there was a world of California almond farmers who grew up pretty poor. Mm-hmm. It's a tough Depression days. And so to write a check and save that school district, come on. Wouldn't you like to do that? To, whatever place that helped you back then, And he loved that school. He remembered the teachers' faces, he remembered their names. And the first thing he said, can I have this? He goes, yeah, it's a copy for you. It's like, wow, it's like a piece of time. That's exactly what I needed. And that was my prospect researcher, too. I listened to her, Colleen. And Colleen told me, she said he went to school in the Central Valley. Where in the Central Valley? And then she dug and dug and dug and found it. And then that was her idea. She says, you need to find something that ties it to that place. I'm like what? That was like 50 years ago. That was like a school picture.
Yeah.
So that's how we found it, yeah.
And that's the way a lot of researchers or people in prospect development think. They make those connections that then make it possible for helping the place and the donor. And now there's another element in all this it's very controversial right now, which is that some people say, well, essentially, there is so much inequity, the kind of inequity you described, even where you grew up and what you experienced working with St. Freeze and right there in that school district. We all recognize that. But some people's approach to that with fundraising is, you know what, we ought to just, we shouldn't be focusing on major and principal gifts or wealthy individuals. Now, I understand the feeling behind that, but what are your thoughts on that? Because you've been very dedicated to social justice throughout your fundraising career. And today, what are your thoughts on that? How to make those things marry?
Major gifts isn't automatically a moral compromise. And right now, there's a lot of people out there like, you know, I really take task with Edgar Villanueva and his whole approach of, hey, wealth is terrible and wealth has been, there's too many wealthy people growing too wealthy fast. Absolutely true. 100% agree. 101% agree. But the solution isn't, okay, let's ask him to stop. There's no solution, right? It's like, it's just terrible. But what's the solution? For me, the solution is for people of color, specifically the Latino community, to find its own power. And absolutely, that is mass, small, Bernie Sanders style giving. Absolutely. But major giving isn't inherently evil and bad. There are good people who are wealthy, nice people who haven't done anything terrible. Yes, there are some people you should not take from, no problem. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because as you know, Jay, the number one determiner in my mind between small, helpless nonprofit and big, strong nonprofit is major giving. Okay? Individual major giving program is the most powerful tool. And why should only only wealthy nonprofits have it? The inequity isn't in wealth. The inequity is in the nonprofit world, because 70% of nonprofits never have a major giving program. 90% have budgets under $5 million. So the universities and hospitals are making all the money, while these other small nonprofits stay small, stay helpless, can't scale, can't grow, can't have an effect because they hate fundraising and major gifts get to gross rich people. It's a huge, huge catastrophic error, and it's like a fish that hates swimming. It's like, you're a nonprofit leader, you better love fundraising. If you don't like fundraising, go do something else. Because there's plenty of nonprofit leaders that despise fundraising. And this, is all this wealth being given out? Could they give out a heck of a lot more? Of course they could. Is Mackenzie Scott wonderful? Of course she is. But that's not the norm. Philanthropy comes from fundraising. There's a whole thing out now where, philanthropy just kind of magically happens. Like, no, philanthropy comes from some guy like me working in an office, making it happen. Okay? It's amazing. I have a huge issue with that, the foundation world, and where they're trying to grow individual giving and try to everyday donors, that's another term. Like, I don't know, why don't you try something that's worked for 150 years called fundraising? Support that. Crazy, I know. A little sarcasm there, sorry about that. I get hot on that subject. So for me, the inequity is really about fundraising. It's really about the power of empowering donors. And there's a whole bunch of well-meaning liberal folks who are like, this is for Latinos. They can't, raise any money. Of course we can raise money. Of course we can raise, billions. I'm the first crazy man to calculate how much Latinos potentially can give every year.
This is a perfect transition. So I know we're going to talk about this. So just share some of the data for a second. What's the potential? What are we actually seeing? Because all of it's undercounted, right? Am I correct about that?
All of it's undercounted. The number one problem is that Latinos are not engaged by philanthropy. Okay,
which is different. That's not to say that they're not involved in philanthropy. They're not engaged by it.
They're not engaged in fundraising. People aren't asking them for money.
Right. Latinos
do give. 63% of us give overwhelmingly to the church. That's the big one, and to kids organizations. So there's 59 million Latinx. We have a $2.6 trillion annual GDP. okay, in the U.S. If we were a country, would have a GDP entirely with France. Okay, so the number one starter of a new business right now is a Latino. Okay, and so the giving for annually, the number and it's a crude number. I'm not a scientist. It's $24.7 billion a year that Latinos could give in the US, right? And that's a conservative number, believe it or not. But even if I was out of my skull and it was 10 billion, the number of foundations give Latinx focused nonprofits is about 1.8% of their giving, about $500 million. Okay, so that's what being ignored looks like by the nonprofit, by foundations and philanthropy. I say foundations and philanthropy because too many foundations call themselves philanthropy, and they're not philanthropy, they're part of philanthropy. And people don't like that, but that's the case. Real philanthropy is the Guatemalan mom down the street who's giving her women's shelter $25 a month. That's a lot of money for her. She's philanthropy, okay? And that's 80% of philanthropy is her. Okay, she's the real power of philanthropy. She's the real power of change in this country, not the Ford Foundation. Okay, she is, and we need to cultivate her and make more people like her give more, as much as they can. You know, she's the real power. She's billions and billions and billions of change. Okay, and so all the focus on diversity, all the focus on inequity is about 18% of philanthropy. This is the thing I have with community-centered fundraising. This is the thing I have with the whole, philanthropy so white. No. You're talking about foundations, brothers. Come on. The whole thing is, all these other different parts of the pie. But they don't know those parts because they're not fundraisers. Okay? Fundraisers are in the background. They're silent. Nobody asks us about philanthropy, even though we make philanthropy. And there's a huge discussion about philanthropy without any fundraisers in the room. It's amazing,
Well, so how much of the origin story is that for your organization? Tell us about how it was founded, what the purpose, Somos El Poder, excuse me.
Well, it was, you were there, brother, to some degree. 2018, I almost died. I had Guillain-Barré, and I was paralyzed. And one night, my chest muscles, my respiratory stopped working, so I stopped breathing. And they brought me back, saved me, very sweet. And I was, after I wrote a few goodbye letters to my family and to a woman I loved at the time, I said, to myself, if you knew you could live, because they didn't know what it was. They told me some crazy things that were terrifying. And everyone listening, Jay was one of the people who rallied to save me, really helped me, and raised money for me when I couldn't pay rent. I didn't have a job that day. I didn't have health insurance. Okay? Jay wrote a big fat check. All right, done. So I was, my hand still worked. This hand, not this one, this one's dead. And I was laying there flat. And I said, well, you know what I would do? What's the thing you insignificant human being, the one thing that is uniquely only you could do? And I said, found the Latino Fundraising Institute. Because it's always been in little pieces in my head. And life is like things going on. You never sit down and write it down. I said, well, I should have done it for a retreat. Died. So it would have been a lot more fun. Get a little yoga and stuff. But no, I'm laying there and I started typing out on my phone. And the original notes are on my phone are all misspelled. I only have a few fingers on it. Right. And I was doing the voice activated thing, trying to talk, making notes and designing it in my brain. And it got me through some bad times. It got me through some really bad times. And when that woman I told you about broke up with me, I was shattered. The Institute, making the Institute was like mental candy. It was fun. It was so much fun. It was like the counter to grief. And so it was born of pain. Yeah, I was born of pain. And as time progressed, I realized you just got to make it happen, man. You're the only person who has this vision. And everyone I told it about, Latino fundraisers, went crazy. They were like, oh my God, it's about time, No one was like, oh, tell me about this. They were like, yes. That was the response, yes. And just to have a virtual room full of Latino fundraisers, we're all like, man, can I touch you? are you real? It's just this feeling of like, oh my gosh, we're together. And it's unbelievably beautiful to see some of the things happening.
So for people who haven't read about the organization, heard about it yet, what is the mission?
Simple. It's the first Latinx fundraising institute in the U.S. And don't get me wrong, I love AFP. Okay? I love AFP. Well, I love Candid. They've been very kind to me. But they're not, Latinos don't participate in either, overwhelmingly. And a lot of what they're teaching is inaccessible because of cost, because they're teaching a level of sophistication nonprofits that Latinx-focused nonprofits don't have, with a few exceptions. And so I designed the Institute to go down to small and medium nonprofits. It's like the Grassroots Fundraising Institute, which is gone now, but with a cultural focus on Latinos. And also, when I was at Cornell, we had the Ivy MIT conference, and it was basically a best practices conference where you learn from what's actually working in the field. It was the best conference I ever went to. My God, my eyes were open. And that's what this is, best practices. So, we had a young woman from LA, Chicana, who was teaching planned giving because she was doing planned giving with Latinos. How is she doing this? So we had a packed room of people who were taking notes and spreading the best practices. That's all. And I told, I said, all of you on this class, the extra price of this class is whoever in a year succeeds, you come back and teach the next class. The continuous improvement model is very simple, not hard. But, the potential impact of this kind of work is massive, right? And so to unleash even a fraction, it's not even about the money to some degree. It's about having people say, sí se puede. It's about nosotros juntos levantamos, which means together we rise. And it's about teaching a young Chicana in Arizona that, I can raise $100,000. I made that ask. I did it. I can do it again, right? And that makes you different. It's not about waiting for the foundation grant. It's about, I'm going to go figure it out and do it myself. Right? And the foundations, God bless them, they can be catalysts for this. That's a whole other discussion. Foundations, with a few exceptions, bless them, have not figured this out yet. I don't know if they ever will, but I'm a big voice on it.
But are they responding to some of what you're doing? Are they seeing that there's a change in the air? And
no, this is the story, man. So the MacArthur Foundation, Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, and the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, two, I'm going to say it, brilliant program officers, told them about this in 10 minutes. They were like, yeah, we got to do this. Mm-hmm. This is different. So I was blown away by that. But the majority of program officers, this is what I heard. This is really great. Oh my gosh, but we can't fund it because our guidelines, there's nothing like this in the guidelines. We don't do infrastructure. That's leadership. Like, no, resilience. That's leadership. We only fund leadership and resilience. So resilience and fundraising, there's no kind of correlation there. You're right, there's a correlation, but that's not how we do it. And then the worst ones are, we want to support individual giving from people of color. I'm like, awesome. And then they're like, well, that was fundraising? Like, yeah, that's how it's done. Like, oh, wow, we're funding this new app and we're funding a convening. Like, no, why don't you fund teaching people to raise money for people of color? And there's a lot of implicit bias, rivers and rivers of it, where people think, oh, you know what? Those Latinos, they can't do it. I always point them to St. Jude Children's Hospital, which raises tens of millions conservatively from Latinos every year. Mm-hmm. You ask any Latina, do you know Santa Julia, St. Jude? Oh, yeah, my aunt gives. My mom gives them. My sister gives them. Because they spend money, they invest. Mm-hmm. There was one radiothon. This is the only published number. And over a 5-year, this is just a radiothon. They raised $111 million from Spanish-speaking people in this country. So does the Diabetes Association raise money off Latinos, number one killer of Latinos? Ooh. No one's gotten the memo there. But the largest organization, Latino organization, they don't invest in Latino fundraising. They don't get it. It's the same thing with most nonprofits. They don't understand fundraising.
I wanted to ask you about something that you wrote a couple of years ago. It was before, or I guess early on the pandemic, if not before, this article about why is green so white? And you wrote, if you want to write an article that lots of people will bypass, try writing one about the lack of diversity and inclusion in the nonprofit sector. It's the quickest way to drive people away. Now, I mean, embedded in that is also this kind of idea about whether something's of interest or not, whether you're talking to a foundation, like you just said, whether you're writing an article in one of our magazines or newspapers, whether you're showing up at a conference. I wanted to ask you, are you seeing a change at all? Because there has been this big discussion since, obviously the murder of George Floyd, but many other things that preceded that and followed that. Are you seeing any kind of change in the way people perceive the opportunity to drive capacity building by communities of color?
No. For me, it's so there's the conundrum is there's more investment in Latino organizations, but so little it's really hard to see. There's that, but fundraising is competitive. It's a sport. It's not like, the organizations work it, right? They're supposed to. And still Latino organizations are too weak to compete. And they don't like to hear this. They like to say it's all racism and implicit bias. Most of it is. Right? But it's still, if you want to raise big bucks from a foundation, then you got to get an appointment, you got to know what to say, you got to do research. You have to have a staff person, a development officer. The majority of the Latinx nonprofits don't have development officers. They don't have veteran grant writers. They have an executive director doing it at 9 o'clock at night. Compared to some other organization, there's well-paid staff. Guess who's going to win, right? So for me, the inequity is still there. Latinx are still under 3% of board members in the state of California, which is shocking. They're still forgotten as major donors. We're not even there, and staff, forget the staff thing. We're not even there with staff. And so, no, I can't speak to the African-American experience and what they've gone through, but for Latinos, we're the easy one to ignore. We're 20% of the freaking population that we're ignoring. And it's the lack of a voice, the lack of people saying hard things. Like, I say hard things people don't want to hear, and they don't want to hear it. But, the article you mentioned, people won't read it, about diversity. Through the magic of LinkedIn, you can see who likes the pieces, right? And if there's 1,000 people reading that piece, and there were 1,600, of the liked, there are 2 white people, like 48 people. There's 2 white people out of 48 people. It's like, who's reading this piece? Not white nonprofit leader. They're going to go, oh, don't do this. I'll just feel bad.
So with the organization, though, obviously you have an aspiration, a vision to make some of that change happen. And you've seen a lot of energy as people come to the organization to help, not just those couple of very thoughtful and smart foundations, but all these other people in the field who really see the value. What do you imagine this looking like in a year or 2 years or 5 years? What's the vision you had when you were in bed trying to figure this out and typing it with one hand? What does it look like?
The first thing I thought of was a conference, because that's where my brain went. And then, I expanded. I changed it to, it has to be a community. It has to be someplace you go where you feel safe and you can be helped. So we are starting a certificate program, 12 classes in very, very practical Latinx fundraising. And then for college students, mid-career professionals who want to enter the profession. We get them an internship or a job with members of the Institute. So it's this like wraparound, like we're going to create this beautiful, greenhouse of growing ideas, supporting each other. The most beautiful thing I've saw since I've been here since I started the Institute, was a Chicana in Ventura, California, get on our listserv, like Prospect Val, That's where I got that idea. And then she asked a question about fundraising, and a Dominicana in New York wrote it back. So this is what you do. And that doesn't happen with us. There's no association of Latino nonprofits. It doesn't exist. We don't know about each other. We don't help each other. We don't know. There's no collaboration or anything like that, really. I mean, there's one organization that's gotten some people together, but the conferences are always about leadership. Let's give out awards. I'm like, the heck with that. Let's raise money. Okay, let's raise hundreds of millions of dollars. So a lot of problems go away when you have hundreds of millions of dollars, you know? And so for me, it's like, it's the thing people don't know about, that they don't want to talk about it, or they don't know to talk about it. But we all know our nonprofits are tiny. We all know they're weak. And we all know there are people working hard right now to take away our rights, you know, and take away our voting and make sure our kid doesn't get an education. And, you know, you can drive down certain streets in DC and there's people who are working hard to really make sure Latinos don't have a voice. And so we got to, you know, punch back, at least equal, and come back with our own money and our own strength, our own organizations. We have great leaders right now, especially young Latinas leading the way, and they need to be armed with plenty of money to get the job done. It's that simple. And I wrote an op-ed just recently that says Latinos can save America, and we can. You know, we're the tipping point between fascism in this country, you know, between something that does not look like America. We get out and vote, we educate, we register, we support real people doing the, you know, real things, and great media. We can do it. You know, there's a lot of us, 59 million people, something out.
You know, I can't help but think that the Armando today, I wonder what Armando, you know, back at high school would have thought about what you're doing today, this kind of vision, but also about your dad. I know your dad was so important to you. You lost him only recently, but he was there with you when you started some of this new path. What was that conversation like? What do you think he would think about where you're going now with this?
What would my dad think?
Yeah.
My dad's proud. I know exactly what he's thinking. He's loving it. He was part of it. He was I mean, yeah, we all do things to make our dad proud, right? One thing for it. He gave me some original ideas I had not thought about. I mean, my dad's not a fundraiser, you know, but I know him, man. And his motto is keep punching. And so that's the way I was raised. You don't quit, you know, and you run to the sound of battle. Okay? You don't cower. And so the battle for me now is the fate of this country, the fate of my people, all my people. And we got to do something. And holding awards banquets, patting each other on the back, more leadership. Leadership is great. Don't get me wrong. But when all the funding to help Latino organizations get stronger and better is in one area, but not the number one most essential area, which is fundraising. You know, you can have the best leader with the best model, no money, you ain't got anything. Okay, that's all it is.
Thank you, Armando. Really, really great to have a chance to talk about some of this with you.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. It's powerful, and it's just getting going. People's heads are beginning to turn because of, God bless the MacArthur and Silicon Valley Foundations, and you know, the Chronicle Philanthropy. And I just want to change it. I mean, the thing I cannot get for all the tea in China is the major foundations that really, let's talk about, you know, teaching them to fish, maybe giving them a fishing boat, and stop giving fish. Okay? Help that organization really learn to diversify fundraising, grow people of color, you know, mass fundraising, teach organizations how to become giants, especially the ones with great models who have love in the community, who are doing good things. And people, even poor people, know about, oh yeah, I know them. They help my sister. Most people are going to give deeply. But nobody, the grassroots fundraising organization's gone. Nobody's working on this. And it's tragic, you know? And so foundations have to stop and think, what is organizational effectiveness, infrastructure? Why don't we have fundraising in it? And what does that look like? You know, why aren't we really about resilience? Resilience is not just leadership and sometimes marketing. It's about raising budget. And so I've never been able to have foundations together to have that conversation, sit down in front of all of them and say, and when I do get them on the phone, the program officers, they don't have answers. They can't say, look, it's just not in our guidelines. That's not the way we think. I had one program officer from one of the biggest foundations in the country say to me, this is a huge hole in our strategy. That's what she said. She had the guts to say that, bless her, because it is. And, I'm sure giving up program is more fun than giving up fundraising. But so the problem is the program officers, foundation folks often don't know a lot about fundraising, very little about major giving, and the idea of brown people giving a lot of money, totally alien. And then there's the nonprofits themselves. If a foundation says, hey, we want you to spend this on fundraising, they're like, no, I don't like fundraising. Because they don't like fundraising as it is. So it's like, how do you teach somebody to do the thing that's going to save their life? So we just started a cohort with the Silicon Valley Community Foundation where they picked out 10, well, they didn't pick them out. This is the story, 10 nonprofits to have prospect research and a consultant work with. Here's the key difference. A freelancer, and we're going to work with these 10 Latinx nonprofits in Northern California. And there's 85 different nonprofits on the list. And they call us and say, hey, if you want this to be part of this cohort, and in 10 minutes it was full. So people want to do it.
Yeah.
You pick the right leaders who want to do fundraising, you can do amazing things. And then have an organization that can spread it, can elevate it, can fine-tune it. For me, it's like, grassroots fundraising journal, AFRA and AFP all together. So, yeah.
Awesome.
But Latino with good music and better food. So, yeah.
Especially your house. Yes.
That's right, brother. You see those, I guess you do.
Thank you, Armando.
The Philanthropy Masterminds podcast is underwritten by DonorSearch, the world leader in donor intelligence solutions. Our producer is Jack Frost. Our theme music is Be My Remedy, composed and performed by House of Say. You can subscribe to the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find blogs, webcasts, and CFRE accredited webinars with our featured masterminds at DonorSearch.net or check the show notes and descriptions.